Hi, my name is Joey Mattingly. I'm an associate professor at the University of Utah, and I'd like to share some of my thoughts on a recent New York Times article specific to pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs. The title was "The Opaque Industry Secretly Inflating Prices for Prescription Drugs." It's a part of a series of articles that we anticipate to be released in the New York Times. I don't know how frequently they're going to release it, but we should see hopefully multiple articles on this. Before we get started, so the article was posted June 21st. I think it was last Friday, I believe. Authors are Rebecca Robbins and Reed Abelson. I don't know the authors from colleagues that I've communicated with. Sounds like they're really solid journalists, and so I have no judgments to make on like their motives or intentions, other than to just get to the truth. And so, I believe they do good work. So I make no qualitative judgments there. Again, they state this is the first article in a series about how pharmacy benefit managers prioritize their interests, often at the expense of patients, employers, and taxpayers. It says that the Times interviewed more than 300 current and former PBM employees, patients, physicians, pharmacists, and other industry experts. Also, I want to share my conflicts because I think it's important, when you hear information coming from individuals, you have to understand like who are they, what acts do they have to grind, or what's in it for them. I've worked in the pharmacy profession since I was 18 years old in 2002. Started as a pharmacy technician, then an intern while I was in pharmacy school, became a pharmacist, then a pharmacy manager, ultimately promoted to a district manager for a chain. I then joined a startup company that was in long-term care to help serve over 23 nursing homes across 3 states. And then in 2014 is when I sort of shifted my career to academia, pursuing a PhD in pharmacoeconomics while being a faculty member. I have studied drug pricing and pharmacy policy since 2012. It's a passion of mine. This is my life's work. I have received research support as well as consulting fees over my career. I have gotten support from pharmacy organizations that represent like pharmacists and pharmacy groups. I have gotten support from pharmaceutical industry, as well as groups like PCMA, the Pharmaceutical Care Management Association. That's the major lobbying group for PBMs. So I think it's really important that I disclose that as well. And then I've also gotten support from groups like the Arnold Ventures through some collaborations specific to drug pricing and policy related work. I share all that to say that, we all have a lot of conflicts, and I think it's important to put that out there. I'm willing to work with anyone, but these ideas and thoughts are my own. So no one's asked me to produce this video. This is just a video that I'm producing because I think it's really important that the public hear a more nuanced discussion of some of the claims that were made in the recent article. I also work at the University of Utah. With the University of Utah, I help our health plan and have consulted, in addition to our own health plan, I've consulted different private companies on pharmacy benefits related issues, as well as state governments and whatnot. So I share all of that to say, you can think I'm part of some industry group or representing some particular stakeholder. Honestly, I have the luxury of being in academia, and I can kind of take shots at everybody and kind of, in my opinion, take my own, try to be as independent as I can. Again, we all have our biases. In addition here, I have family members who have struggled to pay for medications. I've also had family members who have benefited from very expensive medications. And so, we all have personal things that we maybe wouldn't even count financially. It's just that it might impact us personally. So I just share that. Also, my wife is a federal employee, so I think that's important as well. So whenever I talk about PBMs or insurance in general, I always start with this equation. And no, you don't have to memorize the math or anything. I just want you to follow along. On the left-hand side is the premium. The premium is that number that we typically think about when for everyone in a health plan that has to pay on a monthly basis. If your employer contributes part of that premium, then they pay a monthly amount, or again a total amount that's going to get paid regardless. So that's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side of the equation, we have some different variables. So that first little 1 plus LD, and don't worry about the variables, like the memorizing the variable names. Just think about the direction. Think about the positive or negative sign in front of the variables, okay? So the first thing is the loading factor. This includes any administration of the health plan. This includes hiring people to make sure policies are met. This includes hiring clinicians or whatever goes into the administration of a health plan. Also profit. So if it's a for-profit company, if they want to make more profit, it's a positive number, meaning that if they want to make more profit, they can increase premiums, right? Um, or if the administration of the plan, so what about uh, labor? What about when your own employee costs go up, right? That's the administration of the plan. When those things go up, so when broader inflation hits the economy and we have to pay more for our people and people get raises and whatnot, premiums can go up as well if holding all other things constant. All right, the next set of variables are that 1 minus C. That's the co-insurance rate. Co-insurance in this sense is meant to represent all out-of-pocket costs for individual patients. Okay. The premium on the left-hand side applies to everyone, and I'm going to say everyone in the plan. So all beneficiaries. Whether you are sick or you are healthy, you are paying a premium. We all chip in. The C, the little negative C, that's the amount that you pay when you are sick. Okay. This is the amount that you pay out of pocket, whether it's through a deductible, whether it's through co-payment, like a fixed co-payment, like $10 for a generic prescription as a co-payment and $50 for brand or whatever, or if it's a percentage of the amount. Sometimes we elect into plans that have like a maximum annual out of pocket. So maybe it's set at $2,000 for the year or something like that. But that negative C, so why is it negative? Think about the inverse relationship. And I always have my students walk through, like, go look at purchasing car insurance or any other type of insurance. You can elect into plans that have larger out-of-pocket expenditures when you are sick as a trade-off for lower premiums, and vice versa. If you don't want to have to pay a lot out of pocket when you do access healthcare, you might have to pay higher premiums. So that's really, really, really important. The number of articles that I review in the health economic space and the academic space where we focus solely on the co-insurance or the out-of-pocket costs that our patients pay without adding the context of the premium that everyone pays, we are often given a biased discussion, and we're really like doing a disservice both to patients and families as well as all the other people who are healthy, right? So healthy people need to be in this discussion just as much as sick people. So we all need to have this discussion because I'm 40 years old. I'm relatively healthy right now, but I know that's not always going to be the case. I know I'm going to get sick. I know I'm going to have an accident. I know something's going to happen to me that's going to put me in the healthcare system. And so we are all of us are going to be patients at some point. So we need to think about it when we're healthy as well as when we're sick. And then the variables P times Q, this is the idea of the overall price of healthcare. So when, cost of new innovative therapies come out that are quite expensive, as well as the total units of healthcare. So like if more people are accessing healthcare, those two things, as those go up, again, premiums go up. So I always start here. If you do not start here, you often jump right into a lot of managed care nuances without understanding like these broader relationships. And then I like to talk about the pharmacy supply chain. Since this is very specific to pharmacy benefit managers, it's really important we talk about a lot. There's got a lot of acronyms that get thrown out in this space, and there's a lot of drug pricing terminology that we need to cover. So in a very generic sense, we think about a manufacturer selling to a wholesaler that sells to a pharmacy, and then the pharmacy is that point of contact for the patient, right? And if we just use this very simple diagram, we would we could use compendium prices, right? So what is this wholesale acquisition cost, or WAC, or this average wholesale price, AWP, or usual and customary, UNC? These are different prices that often get thrown around. WAC and AWP are compendium prices. WAC is what I mean is they are often they're published. We can use them to like do analysis with, but they're often not real, okay? Or in terms of like they're not really what anyone's paying, but often our formulas are based on these two acronyms. Usual and customary, that's just that's a generic retail term that's used. If you go buy a diet soda from a gas station and you pay $3, that's the usual and customary price for that diet soda at that location, okay? So when you go into a pharmacy and you pay the cash price, no insurance, this is usual and customary. Why is this important? Well, there are groups like the Mark Cuban Cost Plus Pharmacy have gotten a lot of attention in recent years. He's essentially using a usual and customary pricing model. This is not new. This was launched. There's several pharmacies have done this. I was part of a company that had this. We were, the Kroger company for many years, competing with Walmart over 20 years ago. We're competing with the $4 list. So maybe some of you all remember that, having a generic list that is just $4. No insurance needed. You just pay $4. Okay. We set that price. That was our usual and customary price on a set of generics. All right. So it's important to know that the pharmacy sets its price, but that doesn't necessarily mean what it's getting paid. So now let's add a third-party payer and why this starts getting a little bit more complicated. So a manufacturer making a drug doesn't sell to the wholesaler at WAC. They typically are giving discounts and whatnot, and the average manufacturer price, or AMP. There's some challenges sometimes with calculating AMP, but that's kind of a definition that we might think about as that should be. And then, well, with Inflation Reduction Act, there's a lot of discussion on non-federal average manufacturer price, or NFAMP or whatever, or non-AMP or whatever. There's a ton of acronyms that kind of get thrown around. Basically, it's referring to the manufacturer to the wholesaler. There are only a couple major wholesalers in the U.S. that are like the big boys. There's some secondary wholesalers as well, but there's a couple that area is kind of consolidated. The wholesaler does not sell to the pharmacy at the average wholesale price, right? Because in theory, average wholesale price would be the markup that the wholesaler gets on that wholesale acquisition costs. That ain't the case. AWP is often, I think it's like 20 to 23%, 22 to 23% higher than WAC. For most brands. On generics, it's all over the place. Okay, so generics is a whole other world. What we've created, there's a survey that goes out to a select group of pharmacies, not 100% of pharmacies, but a large survey that goes out to collect acquisition costs from pharmacies, and then to calculate an average. And this is this NADAC, or National Average Drug Acquisition Costs. This is a really good tool to try to get an estimate of what pharmacies are buying the drugs for generics. It can also be there for brand. I'm going to tell you based on my experience that brand prices are often in that neighborhood of WAC minus 4 to 6% is what pharmacies are often buying at. And again, that's maybe current. I'm sure if you're Walgreens or CVS, you might get bigger discounts than, say, if Joe's Pharmacy opens up down the street. But those, the small pharmacies also join buying groups. Okay. So they actually try to pool their resources to get buying groups to try to get discounts similar to what the big guys get. Now, these other things that we have a bunch of question marks on, like rebates and discounts with question marks, right? Manufacturers will offer payers / PBMs, and they will offer rebates and discounts to the groups that are representing large groups of patients, right? So if your employer contracts with a PBM, on behalf of the employer, the PBM is going to the manufacturers. They're going to the groups like Pfizer and AstraZeneca and Merck or whatever, and they're saying, okay, to put your drug on our formulary, you want $1,000 per dose. We want a $300 rebate, right? So maybe we want a 30% rebate or something, whatever that is. And there's going to be different rebates, are not flat across every type of brand. And that should make sense because not every brand drug market is as competitive, right? So some markets are crazy competitive. They've got 3-4 different manufacturers competing in the market, and they're all trying to get on formularies. And so they're throwing big rebates out. Some markets are quite small. I'll use an example of Vertex with the cystic fibrosis market. They own the whole cystic fibrosis market. their rebates are stingy. They're not trying to, they're like, what are you going to do? Take us off the market and your patients die? No, you're not going to do that. So they negotiate a lot harder with plans and payers, and payers rightfully so say, yeah, you're right. Like our cystic fibrosis patients need this drug, so we're going to pay for it. So I think it's really important to point that out. Rebates and discounts aren't the same across the different markets. Um, then this question mark about pharmacy reimbursement. So payers and PBMs can be quite aggressive with pharmacies. And here's where I think a lot of my friends in the pharmacy business space, those who own pharmacies, those who work for maybe large chain retail pharmacies, um, that aren't affiliated with a PBM, they are going to have a lot of criticisms to PBMs because they say, the PBM's reimbursements are too low. I'm not going to qualitatively like say that this is right or wrong. I think what's important is that what's probably been the challenge is the scale. So like if I open up my pharmacy and I'm Joe's Pharmacy here in Park City, Utah, um, I'm just one pharmacy, maybe taking care of a couple thousand patients. I probably don't have a lot of leverage to negotiate higher rates, regardless of how good the care I provide to my patients are. So I totally empathize with my pharmacy colleagues that their size and scale is just not something that's like they're probably not going to be able to negotiate with a large payer that represents millions of people. And then remember, our patients may pay a co-payment or co-insurance to the pharmacy, and then they pay premiums to their to the PBM or the payer, often through their employer. I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but this idea of vertical integration is really important. This is often referring, I'm not to pick on CVS, but this is the common one that gets thrown out, and they got talked about in the New York Times article. This is referring to like when one company owns multiple entities in this market, and I'll talk a little bit later, more detail about why that's important. So before I jump into the New York Times article, there's a lot of PBM focused legislation on the table. One thing I'll say that Republicans and Democrats seem to agree on is that PBMs need reform. Now, I don't know how that has worked out, how PBMs have done such a great job uniting the country against them, but they certainly have. Like I feel like Republicans and Democrats both are lining up, holding hand in hand to say we need to reform these PBMs. When I see this, it's like, okay, there's likely a lot of fair criticisms of PBMs that we need to discuss. But I do worry that some of the things discussed in the New York Times article may be misleading and get us to a result that maybe isn't as good as we think it is. So a couple of provisions that are quite common: 100% drug rebate pass-through. So that's saying any rebates that Pfizer gives to the PBM needs to go to the health plan and to the employer or whatever. Prohibiting things like spread pricing, and I'll talk about spread pricing in a minute. Prohibiting clawbacks. So that when you see phrases like clawbacks, that's referring to the direct and indirect remuneration fees, mostly talking about pharmacy, even though DIR also applies to rebates. For pharmacy DIR fees, so my friends in the pharmacy space, they may dispense a prescription. Say they dispense a prescription to a patient. I think this got built out mainly because of Medicare, but I think PBMs apply it across commercial plans as well. In their contracts, they'll say, okay, we will pay you this rate for this drug. And the patient will come in and say April. Months later, maybe towards the end of the year, aggregated with all the patients that were dispensed in April, the pharmacy may actually get a bill or a retroactive fee where the PBM has recalculated that payment that they got in April and said, yeah, we want 5% of that back, and that's part of their contracted rate. It's in the contract the pharmacy signs. Where I agree with my pharmacy colleagues is that there should be a good audit trail. There should be a good way to like say, oh, Mrs. Smith in April, this is what I feel bad for a pharmacy having to say like, what am I actually getting paid in April when I take on Mrs. Smith's prescription? That needs to be really transparent. If there are opportunities for pharmacies to get bonuses or get more money because maybe they provided a really good service, is that an opportunity versus like, are they just, from my pharmacy friends, I think they feel like they're just getting penalized, and they don't feel like there's any way they can control whether their DIR fees 3% or 7 or 10%. I think I've heard it can get high on some products, but anyway, it's really hard to get at. One challenge I often have with my friends that like to take pictures of their DIR bills, they never talk about the revenue that they got. They only talk about the DIR fee that they pay. And the DIR fee that they pay is a function of the revenue that they got. So it's a percentage, and it's part of that broader contract. So I get a little mad when my pharmacy colleagues are like, oh, these DIR fees, I got to pay $200,000. It's like, well, if I do simple math, I can kind of back calculate that maybe you got $2 to $3 million in revenues, and maybe we should be talking about more of what is your true, what should you expect from a gross profit percentage? What amount should the pharmacy profit versus the PBM? And that's a fair debate. We can have those debates. But my point is be careful when you look at just social media posts and what people put out there, because the transparency may not be as transparent as you think. So let's get into the article. Issue number 1, the title and just overall tone. The series title's The Middlemen. I've already had like pedantic arguments with English majors about this, that middleman is not there's no negative connotation to middleman. I disagree. The way middleman is used, it's used to insinuate that the pharmacy benefit manager provides no value other than serving as an intermediary between two individuals. If that was the case, if we're going to use that general definition, then a wholesaler is a middleman. A pharmacy is a middleman. Actually, a physician you could argue is a middleman when it comes to the prescription drug itself. There's a manufacturer and there's a patient. Everyone in between that controls the access of getting the drug to the patient you could argue is a middleman if you don't value what they're contributing to the supply chain. So let's just be careful when we use terms like middleman. They'll say, oh, the FTC uses this term. Yeah, has anyone followed the FTC for the last couple decades? The FTC, depending on which administration's in office, depending on which FTC commissioner is in office, they can be, they have agendas. Let's just say that. And then second, the title. The opaque industry secretly inflating prices. All right, so let's talk about opaqueness. Let's talk about price inflation. How does a PBM get a customer? Anyone know? Like, wouldn't this be a very good area that the authors could have spent some time on? Yes, they should have spent a little bit more time on this. How does a PBM get a customer? They typically respond to a request for proposals, or RFP, that comes from employers. Could be private companies, could be governments. You can actually find public RFPs online. It's actually for a lot of like public school systems and whatnot, you can see these RFPs. The RFP process lays out specifically what the employer wants for their employees. PBMs must transparently communicate using a proposal process that meets all the requirements outlined in the RFP. And then the employers typically rely on benefits consultants. And I'm happy to have those conversations. Like, I'm a little, who are the benefit consultants that are making these recommendations to the employers? So they develop these RFPs and maybe help them select the PBM and possibly evaluate the PBM moving forward. So those relationships could absolutely be more transparent. The challenge is that as employees, when we sign up and get our benefits, we don't see what the employer sees. We don't see what our chief of HR sees. We don't see what our HR professionals see. Could you argue that the HR groups in our companies could be more transparent? Yes, you could. But to like 100% put this on PBMs is disingenuous, and it's not. It's either lacks a fundamental understanding of how this process works, or you've got an agenda, So I don't know which is which. I just know that it's not fully transparent in terms of how these processes work. So, I'm not a journalist, so I'm a nerdy pharmacy drug pricing researcher, but I also know how to find stuff. So like I just said, hey, how do their employees get benefits? Well, New York Times employees are represented by the Newspaper Guild of New York. You can find their Guild Times Benefit Fund information. You can go to the News Guild there. It looks like they're a union for news orgs in the New York area. I think they say they represent like 5,500 members. This is where I start struggling to like find information, right? This is a private company. I can't get this information. It's not publicly put out there. But I would encourage the journalists at the New York Times that are employees of the New York Times to ask these questions of their employer. So who's CNR Consulting and Robert Costello? I did a ton of searching just to try to understand, this person, this consultant. This is a consultant that administers NYT benefits, and his name's all over everything. But I'm assuming his firm does a lot of work for the benefits fund to try to help them navigate this complex process. So it looks like they have different HMO and EPO options as employees of the New York Times, as part of the guild, if you will. Their prescription plan currently is through a company called Express Scripts. Express Scripts is one of the big three that often get quoted. They have their own, again, vertically integrated specialty group. So a Credo specialty pharmacy is where the specialty medications go. So this is the basic prescription plan information. You can find this online. And here, let me stop presenting and show you, like, if I'm a New York Times employee, I can actually answer these questions for my benefits, right? What is the overall deductible? Again, this is the coverage. This will be April 1st, 2024 to March 31st, 2025. This is for the Guild Times Benefit Fund. So let's get into prescriptions. What do we have down here since this is all about pharmacy benefit managers? If I'm a New York Times employee, if I want to take if I get a generic drug prescribed, I have, looks like retail, what is this? $50 deductible. So that means my first prescription, if it's more than $50, I'll knock that deductible out in one prescription. If it's less, then it may take me a couple months. And then I will pay the greater of $10 or 25% copayment for the prescription. Mail order, $20. Out of network provider, looks like not covered. So this means pharmacies must be in network, right? This goes back to so Express Scripts may control a tight network of which pharmacies they want to pay for or not. Oh, now we have different brand drugs. We have preferred and non-preferred. Oh man, what is that about? Well, this goes back to in your RFP, you're asking the pharmacy benefit manager to go negotiate with brand drug manufacturers, the expensive drugs that we often hear about. We ask them to bring down the drug price. If the drug price is $1,000, we want to try to get that down to 700 or 500 or whatever. So we ask them to go do that on our behalf. And say some drugs, so say you have maybe 3 drugs in a category, and one of the drug companies gives a huge rebate. And it's, comparably, clinically comparable. So the benefit manager will move that drug maybe into a preferred tiered status. And move the others in the same class to non-preferred. It's that simple. It's not rocket science. Rocket science. It's not something that's like nefarious, in my opinion. Now we can get into then how do we can get into where those rebates go, how that gets managed or whatnot. So again, I think it's really important that this is pretty clear. You can accuse Express Scripts of being opaque. But that's really, I don't know how much of it is Express Scripts' responsibility as it is the New York Times and the Guild Fund's responsibility to make sure employees, such as the reporters who wrote this story, have really clear understanding of how their benefits get selected and how their drug prices are set. Okay. So again, like how was it opaque to NYT? Oh, sorry, this little looks like I have that slide's a little messed up. I apologize for that. My questions for the authors again, does the guild make its RFP available for the guild members? Have you spoken with CNR Consulting? Can you maybe find out from CNR Consulting what their process is? And then, does Express Scripts create the policies for the drug coverage on generic drugs, preferred brand, non-preferred brand, or specialty? Or is Express Scripts creating these policies in response to what the RFP specifically said? Like, does CNR Consulting give advice to Express Scripts and say, hey, yeah, we're okay with a $50 copay, right? And I say this because I've advised companies that can be more generous with their benefits, or they can be more restrictive with their benefits. And that's a conversation between the Express Scripts company or the PBM and the employer. All right, first sentence of the article, and this is where, I guess I'll start getting a little pedantic. Americans are paying too much for prescription drugs. They say this is a common, long-standing complaint. This is, I struggle with this because yes, Americans do pay a lot for some drugs, not all drugs. And this is where the nuance comes in. So when you start an article out, Americans are paying too much for prescription drugs. My question is, says who? Is that a value statement that like Rebecca and Reed are making? Is it based on the 300 people who answered that we're all just paying too much for drugs? So let's talk about paying for drugs. Thanks to the Hatch-Waxman Act of 1984, so 40 years ago, passed, bipartisan effort passed that helped build a robust generic drug industry in the U.S. Here's from evidence from the FDA published by Ryan Conrad and colleagues, showing that once you get up to 4, 5, 6 generic producers of a drug, so after the drug goes off patent, the drug price comes down like 90, 95%. And we know this. We know that in my own research, I show that metformin, I use like different diabetic drugs around the US and abroad. We compare to other OECD countries. The US for generic drugs like metformin are much cheaper than counterparts like Denmark and the Netherlands and Austria, right? And Canada, right? We always hear that we pay so much more than Canada. Well, not for metformin, you know? So what does that say? Now, where does it flip? Where does the US become more challenging? Brand name drugs, like brand name drug, expensive medications. Why? Because we give them a legal monopoly. Okay, we intentionally do this. Why do we do this? Since the 1960s, thanks to Senator Estes Kefauver, one of my heroes, under the Kennedy administration, they passed law that sort of forced us down a path of new medications required more evidence of safety and efficacy. And as part of that, and we think about the patent process, drugs manufacturers can have several years of patent exclusivity where no one else can compete with them on that intellectual property. And again, after they lose market exclusivity, generics flood the market and the prices come way down. So we pay a lot for some drugs. This is a trade-off that we've made for innovation. So I guess my question is, and this isn't directed at the authors or at anyone. It's just what do we want? What do we want? Do we want, like, maybe there is more discussion on the balance of innovation versus affordability. That is a fair conversation. We can have that conversation. But making quality statements like we are paying too much for like all drugs is not accurate. So my questions when people were saying things like Americans pay too much for drugs, my question is, are you talking about the total cost of the drug or just the patient copayment? Okay, because it's very different. If it's just the patient copayment, then that's a function of the benefit design through the employer and the pharmacy benefit manager and whatnot. And then my next question is, who defines too much? Who says too much? We do not have an acceptable standard that we can all agree on in the United States. Other countries have attempted like a health economics approach where we say our willingness to pay is a certain threshold. We do not have that in the US. So whether that's American exceptionalism or we're stubborn, I don't know, or we want to have choice. My point is when do we say something is too expensive? And then finally, my question is, are you willing to pay more upfront? Okay, in the idea of higher premiums in exchange for reducing the burden when you are sick. Okay, because if your concern is copayment out of pocket, we can fix that tomorrow. We just need to pay more in premiums. Okay, so that means everyone needs to pay more. If everyone is willing to pay more, then we can make more generous benefits for those who are sick. Okay, so let's have that discussion and let's not try to place blame on any one entity in the supply chain. All right, issue number 3. PBMs sometimes push patients towards drugs with higher out-of-pocket costs, shunning cheaper alternatives. All right, so yes, this can absolutely happen. So what's the underlying rationale? The question, the thing that's missed here is what's the net price of the preferred product? Yes, a drug can have a extremely high list price, But if the list price is set by the manufacturer and the manufacturer knows that they are going to give a 70% rebate, yes, it could be a 70% rebate. Is the net price of that branded drug with a 70% rebate, is that net price cheaper than the so-called cheaper drug? Now, the out-of-pocket piece, right? So here's where I agree that this is something that we can fix. If the patient's out-of-pocket is based off of a percentage of the drug, and the drug's $1,000 list price, and their copayment's 20%, well, that's going to be a $200 out-of-pocket. If the net price is really $300 because of the rebate, then charging them the 200 isn't really fair, is it? So that's where I believe the authors are trying to get at, and I agree with them. Okay. But it's missed here is that we need to have that discussion that, like, is that the PBM or is that the, like, I don't know. Like, I don't know the answer if that's totally the PBM or if that's a combination of PBM employer conversations. And so I think we can fix that in policy. And honestly, your out-of-pocket costs, like what I've tried to advise payers, employers is like, hey, if you want patients to take the more expensive drug because of the rebate, give like make their co-payments lower, like make it so that the patient wins, the plan wins, and everyone wins. Pushing patients to certain drugs. So, I want to talk about that concept overall. Everyone in the supply chain has conflicts when it comes to drug selection. Okay. Manufacturers, pharmaceutical manufacturers, they want their specific product sold. Okay. So they're trying to get their drug on formularies and whatnot. Wholesalers and pharmacies have different profit margins across different drugs. Also, the same drugs can have different profit margins, specifically with generic drugs. Generic drugs produced by 20 different manufacturers could have 20 different AWP or WAC list prices. And if they're paid based off of an AWP-based formula, they have an incentive to maybe switch to a higher AWP. And then this article, it doesn't really get into 340B, the 340B program, but let's just say covered entities of 340B want to make sure that you see a qualifying provider so they can get a significant discount on their drugs. PBMs are no different here. Here are my problems with PBMs, or I think if I could try to articulate what I feel I hear from those who are opposed to PBMs. PBMs have the most information in this supply chain. If I'm a PBM and I'm one of the big three, I likely contract with a boatload of employers. I contract with, there's about 70,000 outpatient pharmacies. I probably contract with like 60 plus thousand pharmacies. So I see all their prices. Like PBMs have all the information. So like in a way, there's an informational, they have a competitive advantage in terms of the information that they have. The employers that PBMs represent may not have the appropriate support to understand what the PBMs are telling them. So what do employers do? They hire consultants. They hire benefits consultants. Benefits consultants, and I get so frustrated with this, and I have been a consultant. So I don't know how great the industry is in that space. Like, I don't know, like are employers really getting what they should be getting? And do employers know what questions to ask? I literally have a pharmacy degree. I have a master's in business and I have a PhD, and I get confused in this space too. Okay. There's no other, like, this is my life's work and it's still complicated. So imagine you've been hired as the director of benefits for like a company, and your background is business and human resources and whatnot. It's impossible to expect that individual to have the expertise to tackle things like 340B drug pricing, duplicate discounts, rebates, DIR fees. Like, imagine having to become a pharmacoeconomics expert overnight because you've taken an HR position. So I think PBMs probably exploit, or I don't, they likely take advantage of these opportunities because they know more information than the people that are buying their product. Also, like, Apple knows more about how my iPhone works than I do. So like, I have to kind of take them at face value when they tell me what they're selling me. And then last but not least, what's the best option? Like, what are the conflicts if the best option's no drug? This always frustrated me as a pharmacist, that if I'm representing my patient in the best way that I was taught by my professors, sometimes the recommendation is no drug at all. Okay. If I make that recommendation to a patient and I'm an outpatient pharmacy, I get zero revenue. I get $0 revenue for my business to tell a patient, hey, don't take that drug. Okay. Uh, when the patient doesn't take the drug, the pharmacy doesn't make money. The wholesaler doesn't make money. The manufacturer doesn't make money. The only group that in theory can still make money or save money is an insurance company with or an employer. Like the employer saves money because you didn't buy the drug. The PBM makes money through their administrative fees and monthly premiums or whatnot. So you could have alternatives where we say, you know what, we need to maybe start paying pharmacies in a capitated model where maybe they get fees based on their expertise and advising patients the right way versus all tied to the drug. Let's talk about the spread stuff because this gets thrown around a lot in terms of pushing people to different drugs. And I want to talk about this using an example. Atorvastatin is the generic for Lipitor. It used to be the biggest drug in the market 20 years ago. It's still one of the most commonly prescribed statins for cholesterol. I want to show just, and again, I think like 20 different manufacturers make this drug, but I'm just showing to Dr. Reddy's and Teva as an example. So I use these different acronyms. So NADAC remembers that National Average Drug Acquisition Cost. WAC is the wholesale acquisition cost. AWP is that average wholesale price. So I pulled these numbers for these two manufactured products. Same drug, right? Same active ingredient. These can be switched pretty easily within most pharmacy practice acts. So if I'm a PBM or health plan, or say I'm an employer and I've signed a deal with a PBM and they say, okay, for generics, you will pay AWP minus 70%, let's say. So you get a 70% discount on the average wholesale price. Using this example, my cost of this atorvastatin, if it's Dr. Reddy's, would be $34. If it was Teva, it would be $67. Same drug, double the price. Okay. If the PBM then negotiates with a pharmacy and says, okay, pharmacies, to enter our network for generics, we will give you AWP minus 80%. Now you can see the payment from the PBM to the pharmacy for Dr. Reddy's is $23, and for Teva, $45. Again, double the price. But now what's the weird thing going on here? The PBM captures a spread, a gross profit based on the differential pricing in contracts. Okay. In this case, the PBM actually has an incentive for the pharmacy to use Teva over Dr. Reddy's. Okay. And same for the pharmacy. Like if the pharmacy uses Teva, in terms of like what the pharmacy's buying the drug at is about $1. So the pharmacy actually does get more money dispensing the more expensive product based on that AWP. It's completely stupid. PBMs know this. Okay, PBMs know this. Pharmacies know this. So what do PBMs do? For generic drugs like atorvastatin, they'll create what's called a maximum allowable cost list. They'll likely they know what the pharmacies are buying it at, so they'll probably set a MAC price on this drug. Maybe it's like $5. Okay, so instead of making $44, maybe the pharmacy only gets $4. Right? Pharmacies and PBMs know this. Employers might not know this. So like if an employer says, oh, AWP, I'm getting 70% off of the wholesale price. Yay, right? I get a discount. So maybe from an employer perspective, they're like, oh, I'm getting a good deal. But they're relying on benefits consultants and the PBMs to like be good stewards and say, hey, actually, here's the math. So I think this has been historically part of the problem. I think there's still problems in this space, but I do think more and more HR executives are aware of this now, and I think more people are asking these tough questions on what we should be paying. All right, next issue: pharmacy closure claim. PBMs are responsible for paying pharmacies on behalf of employers that are driving independent drugstores out of business, and basically not paying them enough to cover their costs. Okay, this is stated as fact. It doesn't appear throughout the article if there's any attempt to assess other potential drivers of pharmacy closures or any assessment of pharmacy openings. Okay, so let's ask what the pharmacy data says. So the NCPDP data queue database, NCPDP is the collects all the licensure information for all the registered pharmacies, they're active pharmacies in the U.S. It includes community retail pharmacies, specialty pharmacies, mail order, active like non-dispensing sites. I restricted the data to the community pharmacies, to outpatient community pharmacies, those major community pharmacy types. And if you look from 2017 to 2021, and I'll update this, and again, this is just to pull this together this week and throw some information out there. In a 5-year period that includes during COVID, the number of active pharmacies has decreased by 4%, okay, from 2017 to 2021. If you look at 2018 there, there's a kind of a big driver. It looks like there was a huge, and this actually was driven by chain pharmacies closing at a pretty rapid rate. I think Walgreens merging, I think caused a lot of stores to close. But essentially over a 5-year period, we see fluxes of like net changes of maybe 500 stores out of 70,000. 1 year we saw, minus 2,000, and 1 year minus 1,000. But then we saw in 2021 a gain of 227 stores, right? Now they've specifically, so I'll go back. They specifically mentioned independent pharmacies, right? So let's look at the independent pharmacy argument. 2017, there was a net gain. 2018, pretty big loss, 500 stores closed, or net 500. But by 2020, there was a net 580 gain. Over the period of time, there was a net of 48 stores from this 26,756 ending in 26,804. Okay, so my point is over a 5-year period, independent pharmacies remain kind of flat. Now, with that said, there were a lot of closures, right? 1,000, 1,900, 1,000, 1,400. These are actual independent pharmacies that closed. Okay, so every one of these can come up with a story of like, hey, Joe's pharmacy that's been in town for 50 years, multiple generations, is closing. And then everyone can talk about Joe's pharmacy closing. What's not discussed is maybe Bill's pharmacy that opened in the same neighborhood. Okay, so like there's openings that are occurring at the same time. So let's dive into that a little bit more, closures and openings. Here's what I think is probably causing some of the issue as well. We have independent pharmacists so I've had amazing independent pharmacy mentors, wonderful people. Don't get it twisted. They are business people. Okay. One of my favorite independent pharmacies from my hometown, a wonderful man that I looked up to for 20 years. He's a shrewd businessman. And I say that as a compliment. He is a great businessman. And he's been in business for 30 plus years. I also know that like he's not messing around either. He's trying to make money, so I don't see his work as a nonprofit. Okay. I don't see his work as a charitable endeavor for my hometown of Bardstown, Kentucky. So I just don't get it twisted. I don't tie emotion into, oh, independent is somehow conceptually good and high quality, good, and like things like a chain pharmacy is bad. I started in chain pharmacy. My father was a pig farmer. My father was not a pharmacist. I did not inherit a pharmacy in that space. So I had to go a different route. It was a chain pharmacy that gave me my first job. It was a chain pharmacy that allowed me to thrive. So like chain pharmacies, I think are good too. Like I don't think that they're bad. I mean, so I think we sometimes in the media fall into these narratives that like these small independent pharmacies are somehow better qualitatively than a chain. And if you asked a lot of independent pharmacists, hey, if you could own 10 pharmacies, would you? They'd likely say yes, or you see independent pharmacies growing to little mini chains. So clearly, owning multiple locations isn't necessarily bad. But one thing that I noticed over this period, when you look at closures, the number, and so I categorize them as niche providers versus just standard community retail based on the NCPDP data. When you look at durable medical equipment, home infusion, long-term care, mail order, nuclear, specialty pharmacies, if you categorize all of them in one bucket as like, doing like trying to tackle a specific niche, you'll notice that like from a closure perspective, like 90+% of the closures are always just that standard community, regular, typical retail that we think about. On the openings, we see again, while there's still mostly community, it's a slightly higher percentage of niche providers. So we should be asking, if I was an investigative journalist with the New York Times, I would want to contact new pharmacies that are opening and say, hey, this whole world of like PBMs, everyone says is like the worst thing in the world. Why did you open a new pharmacy? Right? Why did you, knowing that the sky is falling, why did you, as a new business person, see an opportunity and take it? That's the question that we should be asking, because that's the more fair question that captures both sides of like, business opportunities. I say this because it's really frustrating to me as someone who I am optimistic about the pharmacy profession. I do believe pharmacy will continue to evolve and provide value for our patients. And I try to inspire my students every day into seizing opportunities. I hate it when the overall narrative is that there's just no opportunity out there for a young pharmacist. So let's get into the next issue, delaying or preventing access. Are you kidding me? This is utilization management. It's a common function. PBMs support the employers who are trying to control costs. Absolutely, they're trying to delay or prevent coverage. Not all drugs should be covered on a formulary. Point, full stop. No, not all drugs should be on a formulary. Some drugs aren't safe. Some drugs are not the best in that class. Some drugs are too expensive and maybe aren't good value in that class. Should we cover all drugs? If you believe that we should just have open formularies, no control over what we take, that's an argument that's a position you can take. But the question is so if I myself, Joey, if I want to use my money, my income, if I want to take my dollars and I want to buy a drug, um, I should have full autonomy in doing so. But if I want to join with 30,000 other employees at the University of Utah, if I want to join my employer's health plan, is it fair for me to ask the other faculty and staff that work at the University of Utah that their premium dollars cover everything that I want? That's the question. That's the $1 million question. Like when you're trying to make a population decision versus an individual decision, it's different, and that is not something that should be considered like a bad thing. I'm really looking forward to see where Reed and Rebecca go on this, because there probably are instances where PBMs have made a policy, whether it's with the employer or on their own, that has led to bad outcomes for patients. I do not doubt that. I can speak on behalf of my grandmother, who died when I was a first year of pharmacy school. She struggled with a prescribed um, um, proton pump inhibitor that was quite expensive for her. Her insurance would not cover it. It eventually covered it, but then she had an incredibly high copayment, and she had to pay a crazy amount out of pocket. And I remember my grandparents struggling to pay for that drug. So I personally have seen this. However, I don't know if I blame the PBM. I think a part of it is the development of the benefit that likely was a function of what my grandmother and grandfather, their employer, with the PBM, likely did. Is it my grandmother's fault? No. Okay. Is it the PBM's fault? Maybe. Is it the employer's fault? Maybe. Like we should evaluate when we talk about utilization management and delaying care. It's having that. Could it be the physician's fault? Because actually, that particular drug, she was being prescribed 3 times the normal dose that the physician believed this patient needed. Who was my grandmother to argue with the physician who knew the evidence? But the PBM and the health plan disagreed with the physician. So the patient is stuck in the middle. We can have that conversation, but we cannot place blame 100% on a benefit manager that's often following policy and being driven by a more complex healthcare system, and things where maybe we disagree. Here's one that I want to make sure I touch on. PBM subsidiaries, specifically the subsidiaries. I believe they're talking about the group purchasing organizations or GPOs, or I call them rebate aggregators. I criticize my PBM friends on this. This is absolutely ridiculous. Like again, I get as health plans were getting recognizing that rebates were an area that were they wanted more transparency on. Those RFPs we talked about, a lot of employer groups started putting in the RFP that they wanted 100% rebate pass through. Now, my belief, I don't know this for a fact. This is where I'm interjecting my expert opinion. I believe multiple companies to get ahead of the game in the early, 2020, 2021, they founded these subsidiaries as rebate aggregators so that they could the rebate aggregator could go get, a 70% rebate contractually set up with the PBM. Okay, of that 70% we just got, we're going to keep some as fees and then we're going to give you a percentage. And then that's the number you can report to the employer. I I don't have any solid evidence on that. That's just to me, it's like if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. I also think it's really stupid that a couple of them, like, why did you domicile them in Ireland and Switzerland? Like, what's that about? Like, that's so stupid. Again, maybe there's a lawyer that can explain to me why they did that. But just from a overall, if I was the CEO and I'm talking to you, United Health CEO, I'm talking to you, Express Scripts, Prime Therapeutics, Humana, I'm talking to your CEOs. Like, you should come out publicly and explain why you did this. And if there isn't a really good, transparent way that you could explain, yeah, we set up in Switzerland. Look, I love Switzerland, but you've put your company in Switzerland and you're asking American consumers to trust you on this. Like my point is like you need to come out, tell your shareholders, tell your customers, tell the employers you're representing, what's the real purpose of doing this? Why can't you just specifically say, hey, when we went to Pfizer and got a 70% rebate, we're going to give you 100% of that. Why aren't we just giving them the 70%? Okay. Um, or just like I don't understand the need in the subsidiary unless there's a another motive. So I have some cynicism here. Happy to articulate that. And maybe that's where Reed and Rebecca are going with it. I don't know. Next issue, vertical integration. There's this anti-vertical integration sentiment. This has become a new talking point for anyone opposed to PBMs. And here's the CVS image from the newspaper. So the real question should be, and again, they use like, oh, it's a healthcare conglomerate, right? Oh, conglomerate. That sounds scary. Why do they do that? Why do they have the PBM, the drugstores, the insurer, the mail order pharmacy, the GPO, marketing partner? Like, why do they set up all these companies? Why would anyone vertically integrate? Is vertical integration a bad thing? Do other major companies vertically integrate? Well, I guess my question to anyone, any New York Times journalist, is and I'm doing this video from a MacBook, and I have an iPhone in my hand. If I hate vertical integration, I should throw my iPhone in the trash. Throw my MacBook in the trash today. Apple's entire company is built off of a vertical integration model. That's why their software and their hardware function so well together. Like they own the whole darn chain. Um, so if you own multiple stages of production and distribution, then why do companies do it? They sometimes do it to reduce the transaction costs between the multiple entities in the chain. Sometimes it's for greater reliance on supply. Like I think you could argue with like Apple, they don't want to rely on an external software developer because they want to control the total user experience. I like it. I'm good with that. What I love too is a lot of people will cite groups like Mark Cuban's pharmacy as like this wholesome, we're just trying to save the world and fix the PBM industry. Mark Cuban's literal model is vertical integration. He wants to vertically integrate as the manufacturer, wholesaler, pharmacy. Oh, and he's got like a discount card. So like miss me with that stuff about like vertical integration is bad. Like any business person understands that there's times to vertically integrate or horizontally integrate where you buy your competitors. So we could have a more open discussion about when is it a good thing for one entity to control all the parts. Now, is the New York Times opposed to vertical integration? Let's go look at the New York Times 2023 annual report. They generate revenues principally from the sale of subscriptions and advertising. Subscription revenues consist of revenues from standalone, multi-product bundled subscriptions to digital products and subscriptions to single copy and bulk sales of their print products. Advertising revenues derive from the sale of their advertising products. And then they have this little other revenues primarily consist of revenues from Wirecutter affiliate referrals, licensing of commercial printing, and leasing of floors of our company headquarters, television, film, and retail, commerce, and live business events. So they even list that they have other businesses. New York Times isn't just the group that's doing investigative journalism or doing somewhat journalism, putting papers together and putting content out there. They license intellectual property of other businesses that they have this entire component of affiliate referrals. They own commercial printing operations. So like they have multiple businesses that I'm guessing align with their overall mission of their business. So my question to anyone who gets into throwing stones at vertically integrated entities, and trying to like just garner up this like negative, like this sinister motive, like, I don't know, maybe go take a business class, like maybe go like, maybe try to come at it from a more objective lens and say, well, why are they doing that? Is there a benefit? If it harms the consumer, then it's a problem. If it helps the consumer, then maybe it's a good thing. Okay. So my point is it can be good, it can be bad. We need to ask those bigger questions, not just, ooh, vertical integration, so bad. So final thoughts on those videos, gotten kind of long. We may see some major disruptions over the entire pharmaceutical supply chain over the next couple of years. I believe there will be winners and there will be losers. All members of the supply chain are positioning themselves to win. Okay. I have really good friends in the PBM industry. I have really good friends in the pharmaceutical industry, and I have really good friends in the pharmacy space as well. I recognize that there are humans involved in all of this, trying to hopefully deliver high quality pharmaceuticals to the American public. Articles that sensationalize and mislead the public may do more harm than good. Now, I'm not saying that this was their intent. I don't know if it was their intent to be sensational. I don't know if it was their intent to be misleading. I have no reason to believe that. As far as I'm concerned, they may or just be misinformed or listening to the wrong people, or just maybe making the wrong conclusions from the information they get. As a society, we need to grapple with these questions in the following framing, and I want to put this framing out there. What is the best for an individual patient and their family? Okay. When a patient is sick, what is the best thing we can do to help that person get better and achieve their best life? And then secondly, what is best for our entire population? So this includes both the sick and the healthy, or you could say those who aren't sick yet, right? So what is for all of us together to decide, should we do more as health when we're healthy to contribute more such that when it's time for a sick person to receive care, they get the best care? Okay, I'll leave you with that. I know this is a long video. I hope, and again, I sincerely say this to the authors, that I appreciate your work. I know you've worked hard. I've heard based on what you've done, you've worked very hard on this. So I do not mean to disrespect your article. I just mean to call out things that I am afraid are misleading and things that I worry are going to set us back a little bit when we talk about these policy discussions. And I owe this to my students as well as the general public to try to give the most objective perspective on this the best I can. And again, it's not totally objective because, as I've shared before, I've got plenty of conflicts as well. So take what you will from this. I hope this was informative. Good luck. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks.